Hello, my name is Yura and welcome to another Baldur's Gate 3 build video. In today's video I'd like to show you my Beast build, which is another build inspired by the Divinity Original Sin 2 characters. Beast, also known as Marcus Miles. Now, before we start into that, I'd just like to do some little channel maintenance, so to say. So, patch 8 has released a week ago. I'm posting this basically a week afterwards. I would like to do some builds with the new subclasses and so on, but after this video, this build, I still have three Divinity Original Sin builds planned afterwards. So I'd like to get those done as well, but I definitely want to start doing the new subclasses because I think there is some very creative builds we can do with those. Also, I've been thinking of doing Let's Plays, potentially for Baldur's Gate 3 or Total War games in general. I really like Total War games. This is just something that would allow me potentially to post 2 or 3 times a week. I would still have Mondays reserved for character builds primarily. That would stay the same, but then the other 2 days a week would be just Let's Plays. I was thinking of doing just simple ones, maybe 30 minutes to an hour long. If there is enough interest for them, they wouldn't be necessarily heavily edited. So the idea would be just something that you can potentially follow along if you just watch or just listen to it as the background noise, because I would be maybe dropping some tips and tricks and so on as I play on, and yeah, just something that I wanted to do. So yeah, I'll try and see if it works out, if there's enough interest. Otherwise, we can just stay with this formula where we do one build a week. But anyway, let's get back to our build here. So, of course, Marcus Miles, or the Beast in Divinity Original Sin, is a dwarf, and we're going to be going as a dwarf here as well. Dwarves are pretty nice because we do get Dark Vision by default, which is quite useful. We also get the Dwarven Resilience, which makes us have advantage on saving throws against poison. We're also resistant to poison damage. And then Dwarven Weapon Combat Training we don't really care about because we will be multi-classing as a fighter and a wizard, so we'll have all the weapon proficiencies we will need. Now for the subrace, I went with a gold dwarf. I think this one would be probably the most fitting for our build here because, of course, it gives us +1 to hit points every level, so a total of extra 12 hit points at level 12. Now for our class, we are going as a fighter. We'll be going as a fighter because we want to get Eldritch Knight. Marcus Miles, or Beast in Divinity Original Sin, when you meet him, he is, I believe, a battle cleric, and he starts off with primarily air and water damage. Now, air and water damage in Divinity Original Sin can be translated into Baldur's Gate 3, which is basically lightning and cold damage. It's basically the same thing, but just called differently. He also has some petrifying abilities. We can get that later on with the scroll, which is the petrify spell, although it's not a great spell in this game, but it's still a thematically cool one, so to say. For our fighting style, we're going with two-weapon fighting. We'll be dual-wielding 2 weapons, preferably 2 scimitars. I think, well, since the Beast is basically a pirate, and the closest thing to a saber we have are the scimitars, so we'll be going with those. We'll be dual wielding them, which will give us also flexibility where we can cast a spell and then attack with a weapon attack per turn as well. For our ability scores, we're going with 17 dexterity, 14 constitution, 16 intelligence, and 10 wisdom. 14 dexterity is mainly here because, of course, we want armor class, extra initiative, and effectiveness with our weapons. Then 14 constitution is so we have a little bit of HP and helps us with our constitution saving throws. And then we have 16 intelligence to help with our spell casting, and we have 10 wisdom to assist us with a little bit with the wisdom saving throws. We'll be aiming for getting 22 dexterity and 20 intelligence, so there will be a lot of ability improvement +2 in this build, because we don't necessarily need, for example, Warcaster. We can compensate with that with an elixir. Now for our skills, with the background, so the Beast in the Divinity Original Sin is a noble and a barbarian as a background. Now, we don't really have an equivalent to a barbarian in Baldur's Gate 3 as a background, but we do have a noble, so I went with a noble instead, and because of that, we gain history and persuasion proficiency. Persuasion proficiency is pretty good if this is your main phase of the party. History is pretty bad generally. It doesn't pop up too often, so it's not that great. Now, for the skills that we have here, if this is your main phase of the party, I was just going with Insight and Perception. Perception is very useful in basically having all of your characters have it because it's useful to find hidden traps, levers, and buttons. Insight is great on characters that probably would do a lot of talking and so on because they can basically get a bunch of roles that they can see from other characters, the way they behave and so on, so it can be helpful. For example, Moonrise Tower, Zorel, you can potentially unlock additional merchant items if you pass an insight check with her. Otherwise, if this is not your main phase of the party, you could get survival. I usually like getting one survival character just so he can automatically find buried caches, although it's not necessary because you can, if you know the general area, like approximate, I think the radius is pretty generous where the buried cache is. You can use the action with the shovel and then just dig it up there straight up. So it's not necessary, but I still prefer having one character with survival. And then if you don't want that, the other two I would suggest either or pick up either athletics or acrobatics. I went with athletics here because the beast was not my main phase of the party, so I didn't need him to have insight. Alright, so at level 2 we unlock our action surge and we can move on to level 3. At level 3 we unlock our subclass, and here we're going to be going with the Eldritch Knight. These are going to get our start on the spellcasting because of course we want to be both a martial and a spellcasting character with Beast. Now for our cantrips, like mentioned before, in Divinity Ritual Sin, generally Beast would get water and air damage, which roughly translates here to lightning and cold damage. So we're going to pick up 2 cantrips, Shocking Grasp and Ray of Frost. This is going to be thematically quite very fitting. If you do not want to take both damaging cantrips, you could potentially exchange either or. For example, friends, if you want the beast to be your main phase of the party and you want him to talk to people, this is going to be a very useful cantrip because it can give you free advantage on charisma checks against non-hostile creatures. Just do beware that if you cast this on somebody and you're playing hard difficulties, if this runs out or you stop concentrating in the area to the character you use this on, they will accuse you of enchanting them and you will have trouble with the guard. So just keep that in mind before you stop concentrating on this. Just leave the area and then do it. But as for me, the beast was not my main phase of the party, so he didn't do a lot of talking, so I'm going to just pick up Shocking Grasp and the Ray of Frost. Another cantrip that's potentially useful to get later on will be Light, so we'll be taking it later on. So for the first 2 spells that we have here, we would want to, for example, take Thunder Wave and the Magic Missile. These are both quite useful in the early game to finish off low health enemies. But for this example, we're going to take Shield and we're going to take Magic Missile. Shield is great because it gives you 5 extra armor class as a reaction, so you also make yourself immune to Magic Missile damage. And then we'll take Magic Missile itself just so we can easily finish off low health enemies in the early game. I think the early game is probably the most rough area when you play because you don't have high proficiency and then you have generally low accuracy against enemies. On top of that, you're very limited in actions, and having Magic Missile to finish off enemies with like 1 to 6 HP is very useful. Then for the expanded spells, here you have quite a few choices. Now, mainly we want to stick with lightning and cold damage, but also Thunder Wave is quite useful. I think it's quite thematic for pushing objects away. We could take this, but we don't need it in the early game as we won't be really spellcasting a whole lot here. Instead, what's actually nice is you could take the Expeditious Retreat. Now, this is going to be a pretty useful spell. Now, it's not a ritual spell, unfortunately. It will use up a spell slot, but it can last until long rest as long as you concentrate on it. Now, we'll be getting advantage on our concentration sync-throughs, and this is going to help us actually synergize with some of our equipment. So I was just taking this. This will allow you to get bonus action dash on top of that as well for extra mobility. Another good one you could pick up here is Enhanced Leap, which is also pretty useful, but for now we're going to go with the Expeditious Retreat. At level 4, we unlock additional spell slot, and here we're going to be taking Protection from Evil and Good. Protection from Evil and Good is a very useful spell throughout the entire game because it helps you against aberrations, celestials, elementals, fae, fiends, and undead, where they can't charm, frighten, or possess you, and they have disadvantage on attacks against you. And also keep in mind, if some spells we don't get here, we can get them later on with our wizard because of course we can learn spells from scrolls as a wizard. Now, for first feat, we're going with ability improvement +2 into dexterity. This is going to help us with our combat prowess and initiative and armor class if we're wearing light armor or specifically some other medium armors that don't have a cap on armor class from dexterity. Now, either at this point or level 5, you can deal with anti-lethal, and you could get another +1 into dexterity to run it up to a nice 20. We'll be also getting additional dexterity from the Mirror of Loss in Act 3, and then we'll be boosting our intelligence with more ability improvements +2. But we'll get into that in a moment. At level 5, we unlock our extra attack and we can move on to level 6. At level 6, we unlock an additional feat, and here we're going to be going for Savage Attacker. We are heavily investing into our melee damage for now because our spell casting will not be too great, but later on we'll be boosting it so that we can reliably hit our targets with our spells, and on top of that we'll have equipment that will synergize with us casting spells as well. So what Savage Attacker does is basically you roll that 2 damage dice and then you take the highest result, basically boosting your damage with your weapons on average, which is pretty good. At level 7 we unlock the Eldritch Knight feature, which is the War Magic. If you find your body with magic for war, after you cast a cantrip, you can make a weapon attack as a bonus action afterwards. So this is pretty useful because now we can cast a spell and use our weapons if we are not dual building. But since we are dual building, we didn't necessarily need this, but I wanted to get 4 feats, which is going to be quite handy for us, so we get this regardless. It's not something that's gonna be a detriment to us, so it's still good to have it. Now, at level 7, we unlock additional 2 level spell slots. Now here, we have a few choices, or a couple really. We will be switching at one of these, but the one you want to get is Shatter. This one is going to actually quite synergize as well with our boots, because for some reason, if you deal damage to 2 or more enemies, it will apply momentum from your boots more than in one instance. Technically, I believe it should apply it only once, so two momentum stacks. But instead, again, if you hit, let's say, 3 enemies, it's going to give you 6 stacks, which is going to be quite high boost to your movement. Then for the second one, I would take Gust of Wind. I guess it will be very thematic, since, well, of course, Beast is a pirate and you will use a sail ship. You could use Gust of Wind to boost your speed, so to say, but we'll be switching this out on the very next level for something else. So for now, we're going with these 2. Then at level 8, we get an additional expanded spell slot, and here we of course have to take Misty Step. Misty Step is just too good to pass out. It's basically a free teleport, well, a level 2 spell slot teleport that can teleport you to an unoccupied space that we can see for a bonus action. A very good mobility spell right there. Then for the replace spell, we're going to be taking the Gust of Wind, and we're going to be replacing it. Now, here you have a few choices. You can take some defensive spells, so for example, Blur and Mirror Image. These both are great to have. We could also take something like the Enlarge or Reduce, which we cast on ourselves. And then also there is the Magic Weapon, so we could use that as well for our concentration, because we do want to concentrate on some spells. Now, my suggestion in this example would be to take the Blur or Mirror Image for the defenses that they provide. I'm going to be taking Blur because we do want to have some concentration spells, because it will be beneficial to us with some of our equipment. And then for our third feat, for basically our third and fourth feat, we are going to be just taking Ability Rune +2 into Intelligence. Now, we could take Warcaster, but I wanted to get at least 20 intelligence, so our dexterity, basically our casting and weapon attacks, are somewhat comparable, and we can get concentration on advantage of concentration saving throws through one of the elixirs. So you basically have to consider your elixirs to be as a sort of a additional clothing slot or armor slot. So yes, we're going to be getting Warcaster through the elixir, so we can get Ability Rune +2 two additional times. At level 9, we would get Indomitable, but we're going to actually start multi-classing into a Wizard now. This is going to provide us with one subclass that we actually want, and it's going to allow us flexibility where we can learn spells from scrolls, and we can switch those out on the fly whenever we need them. Now, for our cantrips here, I was just picking up Light. You would be at this point towards the tail end of Act 3, but still Light can be quite useful to have there regardless. Then for the rest of the spells here, you could take some of the, like, Mirror Image and Mage Hand. No, Mirror Image, Minor Illusion, Mage Hand. These are useful as a distraction sort of spells. You could take Frenzy if, for example, you get into a dog situation by accident or whatever. You could also take some of these other damaging cantrips. Bone Chill is quite useful since it prevents healing for 1 turn on enemies that get hit by it. So I think I'll be taking that. And instead of Friends, I'll just take Mage Hand because that can be useful. Now, for our spells here, we have to learn 6 of them, or yes, 6 of them regardless. So what I would suggest going for is Ice Knife, Thunder Wave, Enhanced Sleep. You can take Long Strider if you don't have it already, but technically this is quite late in the game and you should already have it. But if you don't, here is your chance to get it. And then for the rest of these, it doesn't really matter what we pick up here because we have pretty much everything we need. So I will be just taking these. So Ice Knife synergizes pretty well with us. It's a 1d10 piercing plus 2d6 cold damage. Pretty decent damage spell right there, especially if you hit them and they fail the saving throw, then they take the full damage. Otherwise, if you miss, they can still take cold damage, but if they save, they don't. So it's a pretty decent spell there. Thunder Wave is going to be useful, especially after we get our Vacation subclass. We can push enemies away and damage them without actually hitting our allies. Enhanced Sleep is a ritual spell. If you cast it outside of combat, it's a great mobility spell because it boosts your jumping distance by 3 times for 10 turns. Long Strider, great to cast outside of combat because it boosts your entire party's speed by 10 feet because it's a ritual spell outside of combat, so you can cast it free. And then I just took Find Familiar because these two ones can be random. Now for the equip spells, I do have some spells that I learned from scrolls, so I have them available right now, but you don't need to worry yourself equipping everything. You can equip all of them. For example, I'm just going to equip these so I can get through the level up, and then if you have too many equipped, you can just equip some of them later on from your spellbook. So let's move on. At level 10, we get our Wizard subclass, and here we're going to go with Evocation. We will be primarily casting mostly Evocation spells like Shatter, Thunder Wave, and so on. So Skull spells is going to be useful because we can avoid our allies, so basically they don't get hit by our Evocation spells, which is pretty useful. You could also, if you want to go with Divination, which gives you the important dice, so it's up to you. I just prefer Evocation because it's nice being able to cast spells around our allies without actually hurting them. Then we unlock 2 additional spells, and here we'll just take Witch Bolt and let's say Sleep. We don't need to have them equipped, so we'll just move on to level 11. At level 11, we unlock our second level wizard spells, and here you can actually get some of the spells we didn't, or we weren't able to get earlier. So we're gonna get Enlarge Reduce, and we're gonna get the Mirror Image. Although I do believe I learned it from a scroll, so I don't have it right here. Instead, let's take Magic Weapon, just so that we have it. And then at level 12, we have the spells equipped here as we wrap up the levels. So at level 12, we get an additional cantrip, and here honestly you could take Blade Ward. You can cast it and then use your bonus action as a weapon attack, although there are better ways of getting it, but you could take it here in this example. And then for the last 2 spells that we can unlock, we could take the Gust of Wind again, so for the sake of thematics. And for the other ones, really you can pick up anything. You could take Invisibility, maybe Blindness, Cloud of Daggers. All of these will be pretty useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Hold Person, although I didn't really use it with Beast here, but still nice to have it. Now, for the prepared spells, now the spells that I did have prepared were Thunder Wave, Enhanced Sleep, Enlarge, Mirror Image, See Invisibility. If you don't have scrolls of it, it's useful to have it on at least one character. Of course, Lightning Bolt. Then Remove Curse as well. If you don't have skulls of it, it's useful to have. Gust of Wind. Gust of Wind is essentially a weaker version of Thunder Wave almost. It does the same thing. It pushes enemies away. It ignores allies because it's an evocation spell. But instead of dealing damage to them, it makes them off balance, so they have you can attack them once with advantage. Right. Well, Thunder Wave does the same thing, except it damages them as you push them away. It doesn't give them off balance immediately. And then because we're going to be getting for our 4th and last feat, ability room +2 into intelligence, we in theory should be able to equip 2 more spells because every 2 points in intelligence gives you an additional spell slot. So you'll have quite a few choices. But again, later on, I can just unequip the ones that I'm not using, and then instead of having 10 out of 10, I would have, let's say, 6 out of 10 or 8 out of 10. All right, so that is it for the levels. I'll now see you in the equipment section. Alright, so here we are in the equipment section, so let's start with our headgear. Here we have the Bicorn of the Sea Beast, which is basically the beast hat from the game. You get this hat if you buy the digital deluxe upgrade edition upgrade, whatever. This is the DLC, basically the only DLC for the game. It has a bunch of really cool items in it, like the digital artwork, character sheets, and of course it gives you the Divinity Ritual Sin characters some of their items as cosmetics. So basically this is just a hat. It doesn't have any magical properties. I've been running with it mostly because of the aesthetics, but of course if you want something that's actually going to be useful for you, for example, we have here the Float Heldas helmet. It gives you +2 bonus to saving throws against spells. And then the one that I would probably run instead of the hat would be the Helmet of Arcane Acuity. Whenever you deal damage with a weapon attack, you gain Arcane Acuity for 2 turns. Now, of course, since we'll be able to attack 3 times with our weapons, we would get 6 stacks of this. So our spells will be quite powerful, although you have to keep in mind that This reduces by 2 each time we take damage. So, and I noticed the AI really likes attacking characters with arcane acuity. They really like to attack them so that they reduce this arcane acuity. Otherwise, what it does, it gives you +1 to spell save, DC, and attack rolls. So you can get up to 6 in a turn if you manage to hit them 3 times, which it boosts your spellcasting quite significantly. For a cloak, we're going with the Vivacious Cloak. You gain 8 temporary hit points after you cast a spell in melee. We'll be casting spells in melee basically all the time, so we can get 8 temporary hit points pretty much every time we lose it. Otherwise, you could use the Cloak of Protection, armor class saving throws +1, although honestly, armor class we don't really need. We have 23 armor class, which is quite high. For the armor, I went with the Armor of Agility. Add your full dexterity modifier to your armor class. Additionally, this armor does not impose disadvantage on stealth ability checks, and we gain saving throws +2. This is a pretty good armor class, probably the best medium armor in the game. You get this in Act 3. And then for the alternatives, you could run the Adamantine Scale Mail or the Splint Armor. Basically the same thing, just Splint Armor is an upgraded version. It has more powerful effects. So it reduces damage by 2 instead of 1, and it gives enemies reeling for 3 turns instead of 2 when they attack you. And then everything else is the same. So yeah, these are both great choices. You could also then get the Dark Justiciar Half Plate. This gives you, while obscured, the wearer has advantage on stealth checks. We also have advantage on Constitution saving throws, and we gain Shards Ages once per long rest. So this you could use for your sort of pseudo warcaster until you get enough or a big supply of the Elixir of Peerless Focus. Or you could also use in the early game Spider Silk Armor, which basically for the same reason, it gives you advantage on Constitution saving throws, and you gain +1 to stealth checks. So these two armors would be mainly we would want for the advantage of Constitution saving throws, which of course are advantage on concentration saving throws. And then afterwards, once you have enough of the Elixirs of Peerless Focus, you can then switch to Armor of Agility, which is going to basically finish or fulfill your build. For our gloves, we're going with the Helldusk Gloves. You gain +1 to spell save, DC, and attack rolls. Our weapon attacks also deal additional 1d6 fire damage, or if you use unarmed attacks, we deal 1d6 necrotic damage, and we can possibly inflict bleeding. It gives us +1 to strength saving throws, and we also gain Radiance of Fire as a cantrip once per short rest. So this is actually a very good piece of gloves for the beast here. This would sort of equalize our spellcasting and weapon attacks with basically one spell save, DC, and attack rolls equals kind of to having +2 into intelligence. So it's kind of similar. And on top of that, we gain extra fire damage on weapon attacks, which is pretty good since scimitars are relatively low damage, and this is going to just boost them a little bit higher. For the alternatives, we have the Gloves of the Growling Underdog. This gives us advantage on attack rolls while surrounded by 2 or more foes. Pretty nice set of gloves. You find them very early on in the game. Always good to have on a character. They're not considered armor, so everybody can wear them. The other ones we have here is the Flawed Helldusk Gloves. These are just basically a weaker version of the actual Helldusk Gloves. You deal 1d4 extra fire damage, and if you're using unarmed strikes, you deal 1d4 necrotic plus possibly inflict bleeding. And then lastly here we have a sort of a notable mention, Gloves of the Balmage's Power. Balmage's Power, when a weapon attack inflicts a condition, the wielder gains arcane acuity +1, basically 1 turn. These gloves will be pretty good on generally most of the Eldritch Knights, but they have an issue. Basically they're bugged and they don't work, which is quite a shame because these are pretty nice set of gloves. So we have them here just as a noteworthy mention. For the boots, we're going with the Boots of Elemental Momentum. Whenever the wearer deals acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage with a spell or a cantrip, they gain momentum for 2 turns. So these boots are gonna give us great mobility. These boots are actually pretty good on, for example, some Paladins and Eldritch Knights. Since we'll be primarily casting the Shocking Grasp and Ray of Frost, and also with our spells we'll be casting cold and light damage, these boots should pretty much always in a turn give us 2 momentum, which is going to give us pretty good maneuverability around the battlefield. For the amulet, we're going with the Necklace of Elemental Augmentation. When one of your cantrips deal acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage, you add your spellcasting modifier to damage dealt. A really good necklace to have for us here because primarily we'll be using the elemental cantrips. So this is going to boost their damage with our intelligence modifier, which in the A game will be a +5, so that's pretty good. For the ring, we're going with the Ring of Arcane Synergy. When you deal damage with a cantrip, you get an Arcane Synergy for 2 turns, which what it does is your weapon attacks deal additional damage equal to your affected entity's spellcasting modifier. We'll be pretty much using cantrips every other turn since we get this for 2 turns, so then we can deal extra 15 damage with our 3 attacks because we'll get +5 per attack, right? So must have a ring right there. And then lastly, we have the Ring of Elemental Infusion. When you deal acid, cold, lightning, fire, thunder damage using spell cantrip, you infuse your weapon attack for for your next attack with 1d4 damage of that element. So basically, a lot of our items here synergize with our cantrips. This deals extra damage with our weapon after we cast our cantrip or a spell. That is elemental, of course. Now, I didn't take any alternatives here because I think these work the best, and you will utilize them pretty much every single turn of combat when you fight with this character. For our weapons, we're going with the Salty Scimitar. This is basically just a Scimitar +2 that has one use per long rest of command. I thought it would be very fitting because it is a kind of a pirate Scimitar with all of the R's, right? And of course, Beast is a pirate, so it naturally fits him quite well. Although you do get this quite late in game in Act 3. And then for the offhand weapon, we have the Adamantine Scimitar. What it does is, if an adamantine weapon hits an object, it's always a critical, and this weapon ignores resistance to slashing damage. And it, of course, naturally transfers this ignores resistance to slashing damage to your other hand weapon, so now both of your weapons ignore slashing resistance, so you will always deal full damage unless the enemy is somehow fully immune to damage from slashing. So, pretty good combo right there. Then for a ranged weapon, we are using the Gangrel Aspiration. Now, primarily a ranged weapon would be a stat stick weapon because we try to use our melee attacks, but since we have high dexterity, we can also reliably use our ranged weapons as well. I'm mainly using Gangrel Aspirations here as it is a stat stick which gives us advantage against monstrosity type enemies. For some of the other weapons, you could use the Hunting Showbow, same reason, advantage on monstrosity type enemies. Darkfire Showbow is great because it can give you one haste per long rest, which is pretty good. And then we have Herald here, which when you deal damage to target, it must succeed a charisma saving throw or they become Bane for 2 turns. So this is also a pretty good range weapon you could potentially use in the late game, although again, you will not prioritize using your crossbow. Instead, you want to use your swords and your spells. And then final mention, we have, of course, the Elixir of Pitiless Focus, gives you advantage on concentration saving throws and against being charmed. Magic can put you to sleep and replaces other effects of other elixirs. So this is basically where we are going to be getting our Warcaster for the late game. And then, of course, I wanted to mention some of the scrolls. Since we get up to 3rd level spells, so the highest level spell that is synergetic with our character is the Lightning Bolt that we can cast. Otherwise, I would suggest picking up scrolls. For example, you can pick up Ice Knife, Cone of Colds, Chain Lightning, Ice Storm, Autolux, Freezing Sphere, right? And all of these ice and lightning spells that will synergize with our character. You will get a bunch of scrolls anyway because you can buy a lot of them or even steal them. Although stealing is kind of hard from the Wizard Tower, but buying them from there, you will get access to a lot of good spell scrolls. And of course, not to mention is the Scroll of Flesh to Stone. It is sort of just to imitate the petrify ability that the beast has in the Divinity Original Sin. Alright, so that is it for the equipment. I will now see you in the combat showcase. Alright, so here we are the Flaming Fists barracks for Eternal Baldur Showcase. Before combat started, I did drink an Elixir of Pitiless Focus and I did cast Enlarge myself for extra 1d4 damage with our weapons. So generally with the beast, what you would want to do is try to get your arcane synergy going. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna cast the Shocking Grasp on one of these fists. So this one has 94% chance with advantage because he has only 16 armor class, and of course Shocking Grasp has advantage against metal armor naturally. So we're gonna using this on this guy. If you take a look at the damage, it's quite decent. So we deal 38, which is normal, and then +5 from our elemental augmentation from our amulet. So minimum damage we can deal with this is 8, which is pretty decent. Now, for the rest of our actions, keep in mind, if you have the toggle dual wield turned on, you won't be able to use your action, because it says here, it costs 2 bonus actions, right? Because the game is kind of giving you both of these, both your offhand and main hand. So what you do is you just turn this off, and then if you try to attack, it will work. Now, it doesn't work here, but because if you click it, it doesn't work. But if you just hover over the target, you can still attack. And we actually managed to crit there, which is pretty nice. But I want to look at the damage with the normal attack, not crit. So let's just use a normal attack. There we go. So if we take a look from the previous stack, we did have it infused with 1d4 lightning, and it also gets reloaded with Savage Attacker, which is pretty nice. It should increase your damage on average. Here we rolled a 2 twice, but that's fine. It's only 1d4, it's not too much of a big deal. Then for our normal attack, we dealt 20 damage, so we got a 5 from our 1d6 slashing with a reroll. We got an 8 from the enchantment plus our dexterity. 1d4, that's from the enlarge, and then of course our spellcasting modifier is 5. So pretty decent damage. just from our weapons, especially since a scimitar is only a 1d6 damage weapon, right? This is why where you would want to cast Enlarge on yourself. It's a really good spell for Eldritch Knights that don't have great weapons and so on, especially also if you are not using the Enlarge Elixir, which in this case we are not, because we don't need to, since we have access to the spell and we gained our Elixir for advantage. And I guess let's just finish this guy off. And basically that is it. So I hope you enjoyed. I would appreciate it if you leave a like and subscribe for more Baldur's Gate 3 content, and I'll see you in the next one.